What's up, traders? Matt from the Trade Brigade here with your earnings roundup for the day. On the left-hand side, we have the daily time frame, and on the right-hand side, the 30-minute intraday time frame. Those things will not change. However, this, of course, is the list of tickers that we will be cycling through. Just to recap, it's SOFI, AMC, Plug, CRM for Salesforce, Wish, CELH for Celsius, as well as JWN for Nordstrom Holdings. All right, let's move that off to the left here and get right into our first candidate, SOFI. What's going on the daily time frame chart before we take a look at the after hours? Well, on today's session, we faded back towards the low end of this daily balance after a look below and fail. It really happened in a manner, fast enough manner, I should point out, where we would expect that to be a look below and fail, and the target on that type of pattern is always the top end of the range. Now, if we look at what's going on in the post market, as we come into this earnings announcement, we are making a screaming move to the top of the range at 1330. So, does this hold for a gap up for tomorrow's session is, of course, the question. And if it does, I would just remind you that because we're gapping green over red, it puts a lot of pressure on anyone who is building a short position during today's session. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that today's session was indicative of a lot of shorts being initiated, and instead, it looks more like profit taking in the face of uncertainty from the earnings announcement from anyone who got it long on the way higher here and was able to puncture back up into this range. Okay, so it doesn't strike me as a lot of new short positions that were initiated there based on the action and how it unfolded, but we are still gapping green over red, which is always a catalyst for some potential, again, I use this word very lightly on the channel, squeeze, just added buying pressure, correct? So we'll see. 1330, if that does break, so if we can essentially get something, we'll talk about gap rules in a second, but essentially if we can get something that consolidates below, then breaks that, we're looking for the next daily resistance, which you'll notice is probably right here. I don't want to cherry pick these highs up here because that's a bit of a stretch, right? Do I really think that SOFI is going to go to 1644, 1650 on tomorrow's session after a massive gap up here? Like, again, just try to picture this in your head. Do you think that the candlestick on the daily is going to look something like that? I'm not overly convinced, right? Is it off the table completely? No, there's always a chance that anything can happen in the marketplace, but it seems like a bit of a stretch. The more appropriate resistance area I would watch out for is probably here, right? 1416, 1415, based on prior support, then flipping to resistance in this area as well. So to me, that's the more reasonable upside target. After that, yeah, if there's really momentum, if volume is absolutely crazy off the chain here, let's just pick out a high volume day. It's got to be at least this if we're going to make a run for the daily bar to look something like that, correct? So volume's at least got to be like north of 250 million shares per 30, not per 30-minute bar, but on the daily cumulative if it's going to have a day like that. So on the 30-minute chart, what might that look like? I don't think we'll be able to see that crazy day here. It's probably, let's just think logically here. It's probably multiple sustained 10 million shares per 30-minute bar throughout the course of the day, not just on the open, but sustained throughout the course of the day if there's a chance we make it to that upper target there at 1644. So use volume as a guide. In terms of drilling back down to the 30-minute and talking about our gap rules, that's if we get upside continuation in the first place. We always know that we're usually looking for fades anyways, inventory corrections on gaps from earnings catalysts. So we, of course, want to know where the overnight high is. We're going to map that in quickly right here. We're going to map out the forecasted open. Let's just drop it down a little bit. Say there's a little bit of a pullback here that happens and we open there. Overnight high is, again, in this area. And, of course, today's high of day for the gap fill. On the daily time frame chart, this becomes pretty easy to look at. If we open here and fail to accept anywhere towards the top of the range or above the top of the range, so if no buyers show up there and we trade back down through the opening print, that's a fairly good indication of a short that we should correct that inventory from the after-hour session here and fill the gap to today's high of day at $12 roughly. From there, you would reassess the chart. Are we going to get something that looks like this? Gap fill reversal off of 12, that's certainly a possibility as well. So please reassess when we get to 12 and don't just assume that it's got to go all the way back down to 9, okay? So 12 will be your critical support to the downside if we get the gap and trap, aka the move lower off of failing to accept or find new buyers up and over the top of the daily range, or just quite simply put, the overnight high. The flip side of this scenario, and something that could equally be as valid depending on how we actually open up here, is if we open above the daily balance, then you're watching for pullbacks that hold and then do something like that, right? Anything that breaks up and over, or through rather, the opening print sets up a long trade to get us into that target here, 1416. Then we'll monitor for continuation. Again, unless volume's really there, unless it's a huge momentum style trade, I don't think 1644 is on the table. So just monitor for continuation in this range. You're probably looking at your $half targets, the psychological stuff, right? So that's what we've got on the up and downside here inside of SOFI. I know we spent a lot of time on it, but this one does look fairly exciting, making this pretty nice move in the after hour session. So up next, AMC. Of course, all the apes. What's going on with those guys? Well, if we take a look at the daily time frame chart, there's potential that this is a double bottom. Again, we also thought that this was potentially a double bottom. Now we got to zoom out, right? So if it's going to be it's got to be up and over 2075 at this point in time. If we zoom in on the 30-minute just to see what's kind of going on here, looks like a little bit of volatility. Of course, the number hasn't officially come out just yet, but we'll see. It looks very likely based on the volatility here that this is going to become a reason for people to potentially sell, right? So to me, any sort of moves higher, even if it goes higher, right? What I'm getting at is it's just an opportunity for people to sell AMC. And the reason I'm so firm about that is because if you think about all of these people as overhead supply, I mean, they're looking for any excuse to get some of their money back. Now, yeah, you are going to get the crowd who's like, oh, maybe this is a double bottom and it's got to go higher, but you're fighting all of that overhead supply off to our left, and the realization from a lot of retail traders who are now underwater on this stock that, maybe it's not going to be such a great thing to hold for the long run, okay? So that's all I'm saying about AMC on a gap up. Again, as of right now, looks like it's just a reason for people to sell the stock, the earnings just as a catalyst for volume and volatility. We'll see. To the downside, obviously your critical support is down here at 1470. So if it does gap down, you are watching to see if that holds and we get any sort of bounce. Now, because if we do get the gap down scenario, we are coming off of a lower high here. That would sort of be the third cluster of attempts at the level, right? So this is 1, there's 2, this would then be 3. It definitely turns into a flush point at that point in time, and then we would look for lower on the break of 1470, right? So that's what we have in AMC. As of right now, it's not abundantly clear whether or not it will be a true gap down or will open inside of range. So just monitor that. Again, as I've mentioned, I don't really believe that even if this is a strong gap up, that it's sustained. I do think it's just an excuse for people to sell into, all right? So that's AMC in a nutshell. You can call me a non-believer, you can call me whatever you'd like, but that's how I'm objectively looking at the chart. Plug Power, what's going on with their earnings? All right, let's zoom in here. What do we have? A couple of older levels that aren't really doing us too much good. Let's just clean up the chart. Those aren't really making too much sense to me, at least as of right now. So this was prior support. That might have been a level I just removed, but nonetheless, I like just putting it in manually, right? It's always nice to know where that's coming from. So support there on the gap from here to here, also prior resistance. I like that from the aspect as well, that maybe this is a double bottom and we're holding that neckline. In terms of earnings, again, the number isn't officially out yet, but just a fair bit of volatility. Big high, big low, kind of opening towards the lower third of today's range. But as long as we hold up above 24, that's a bullish indication, noting again that this is a bullish pattern. It's a reversal pattern. We do have that higher high. We can now essentially afford a higher low, even if it comes down and fills this gap here. As long as we turn around for something that does this, higher low from there to there, fantastic. That's absolutely fine. We can afford that now that, again, we've given ourselves that higher high. Just to let you know, that gap fill area is 2258 to the downside. If we break out of range to the upside, then obviously what we want to see is wherever we gap up to, if we pull back and hold support off the 2-day balance highs, 2571, that would strike me as a bullish indication, right? So anything that moves higher, let me illustrate this on the 30-minute time frame here for us. So let's say that by the time the open actually rolls around here, we're slated to be opening up here. Let's say the overnight high is up there. Again, just like our framework states, any failure to take out that overnight high, trade short back down through the open. I probably wouldn't look for the short trade and instead look for the gap fill reversal. Again, so anything that looks like a hammer candle down here, anything that looks like an indecision doji, basically things that would or sort of start to imply that the buyers are stepping up at the top of the 2-day balance and continuing this daily reversal to the upside strikes me as interesting for longs. Once again, the top of that area here is 2571. So those are the scenarios I would watch out for and plug. If we open inside of range, just look for continued balance, right? It's as simple as that. Try to buy the lows and sell the highs until we can ultimately break out one way or another from the top or bottom of the range. But overall, I do like the looks and the start of this reversal pattern happening here on the daily time frame. Let's go over to CRM for Salesforce, see what's going on in the after hours here. Anything interesting? Does look like there's some fairly large green candles there. Let's see if they're sustained, right? Because again, look at the lower wick on the first 30-minute bar. Lots of volatility, right? Big overnight low, big overnight high. As of right now, it does look like we're getting price acceptance towards the upper third of the overnight range, but as always, and this should go without saying, a lot can obviously happen between now and 9:30 when the bell actually rings. So let's map out a couple of critical areas. Overnight high, today's high of day, today's low of day, as well as the overnight low, just to get a sense for kind of what's going on here. And we'll just put a line here to indicate where the anticipated opening print is. On the daily time frame, I would encourage you to not forget what the overall trend is. I mean, clearly from the highs, lower highs, lower highs, lower highs, lower highs, lower highs on today's session. Even if we gap up and make a move and open up in here, it's essentially an equal high to what we just pointed out as the last major area of structure, right around in here, right? So to me, it hasn't proven itself just just yet that this is a major turnaround inside of Salesforce. So what I would watch out for are very similar, right? It's always very, very similar whenever we're dealing with these things that are gapping in and out of ranges. If we gap out of range, which again, here's the anticipated open, as long as we, fill the gap and support off of it, basically today's high around 214.36, target the overnight high. Again, you're not looking for a major reversal all the way back up to these levels in here, but target the overnight high, right? That would seem likely to me as a solid trade. So again, that might look something like this. You're not shorting it there. You're taking it long instead back up through the open for the move to the overnight high. That's a reasonable trade idea here inside of CRM. If we get more price acceptance down inside of yesterday's range, just look for back and forth balance. You can see today's session was not dominated one way or another from the buyers or sellers, right? You can clearly see there was a lot of give and take, and it just so happened in the last 30 minutes of the day, the sellers happened to dominate that period, right? But you can see down, up, down, up, down, up, down. You get the gist, right? It was a fairly balanced day net, although we did move lower, okay? So to me, it doesn't strike me that, this has to automatically collapse. And again, if we fail back into today's range, I would look for two-sided trade back and forth activity to take place instead of a breakdown all the way to today's overnight low, currently 200. If we open inside of range, and again, this could happen because we don't entirely know, there's just a lot of volatility here. If the open per se is in here, then watch for the two-sided trade. And then if it breaks today's low, that sets up a more interesting trade that potentially it's a move to the overnight low. And we're not coming from up here and then first breaking into the consolidation range. We're already deeming these prices fair, and then we're looking for a more initiative move if we've already opened inside of today's range. Okay, so hopefully you can see the difference there inside of CRM. Next up, we have Wish. I hate how people call it, and I hate how the official name is Context Logic, but nonetheless, this is just simply Wish. This thing is in the gutter, all right? This is something that I would not touch with a 10-foot pole. A lot of popular YouTubers were talking about it back in the day. I don't see the allure of it. I've never ordered anything off of Wish, so from a fundamental and actual practicality perspective, I've never used it, and it just, look at the chart. It's absolutely hideous, right? There's nothing about this that would even remotely suggest that there's any bullish activity here. So keep that in mind. Keep that on the forefront of your mind as we go through this analysis here. What's happened over the past couple of days, just kind of getting caught around in this chop zone right here, and also look at the range, right? Look at the range on this thing. We're talking about a 10-cent y-axis. Do you really want to trade something that takes all day to move 10 cents? Personally, I think that there are much better opportunities out there in the options world. The volume on this thing is also getting incredibly thin, right? So, we're talking about, 20, 30 million shares. That's fine, but on something this low in price, it's not really that. You can get in and out, it's fine, but it's just not really that impressive, I suppose, is what I'm looking for there. It's not like a ton of big players are getting involved here. Nonetheless, what's going on in the after hours? What's going on with the earnings number here? Looks like we're going to open on a gap down. There's a little bit of an attempt to make the retracement into today's range. Let's just go ahead and do what we always do. So here's today's low. Here's the overnight low currently. Nice double bottom, tweezer bottom there. And we have the forecasted opening right here. Let's take a look at this on the daily time frame chart. Again, are you going to actually trade this for the gap and trap, something that looks like that? Absolutely not. You're looking at, what is that, a 5-cent range? Do you really want to trade for 5 cents? No, right? So basically in Wish, this is an avoid at all cost stock. The absolutely only thing I could see this potentially turning into as a good trade idea is if for some magical reason we can gap up as a green candle up and over a red daily bar. Again, what did I sort of point out from, I believe it was it SOFI we were looking at? I can't remember which one we were looking at that was a gap over green. But nonetheless, if we can get that action to take place, which doesn't look likely based on what's going on right here, but if it takes place for some magical reason, again, the pressure's kind of on the shorts, and we're looking for a rotation here to roughly 263 daily 50 SMA. Even if that happens, again, let's say that we open at 250. Do you really want to trade for a 13-cent range inside of Wish? I'm just not seeing it. So to me, this is an avoid at all costs, but those are a couple of scenarios that you can at least pay attention to. Are you going to short this thing? Let's quickly come on over to the trade tab. It's hard to borrow. You're not going to short the shares, and the put contracts here, they're actually not bad in terms of volume. So if you did want to short it for the move lower, I wouldn't call you crazy. I just don't think it's an opportunity that I would personally be interested in given the ranges that travel here. So if the short position does pan out, again, if we open on this small gap down, roll over off the gap fill, your short's back down through the open to target target, the overnight low, $2, the nice psychological number. So it's as simple as that. And wish, let's move along from that sort of pile of garbage, as I would put it. So next up, CELH, excuse me, for Celsius Holdings. This chart is wacky. We're going to clear the drawing set, start from scratch here. What's going on from the daily perspective starts to become a nice reversal here, actually. Look at these beautiful higher lows that are forming, even in the face of a trending market to the downside. We also have highs, higher highs, higher highs, higher highs. So, that's fairly solid. That's fairly solid, especially given what the overall market has been doing the past couple of weeks / months, right? Sure, it had its bout with the sell, but nonetheless, this is making a quicker recovery. So let's take a look at the after hours, see what's going on with the earnings number. Looks like we will be slated to be opening on a gap down, which kind of goes against what I just pointed out. But if I just pop our levels on here, this will be fairly telling. Let's just say again, give ourselves a little bit of breathing room for the forecasted open, slightly above the overnight low. You get the point, right? If we do something like that, this again is the forecasted opening zone, we'll call it. What is that? Well, if I do something like this, it has the possibility to be a new higher low. And noting that we've made a new higher high, we can afford a higher low pullback and then continue the trend to the upside. So what I would want to see, if the daily trend is going to remain intact here inside of Celsius, is an immediate turn on the open to fill the gap overhead. And based on what we know about gap rules and inventory corrections, it doesn't seem like that's an unlikely possibility. It seems like it could happen, right? If this inventory is getting too far ahead of itself to the downside, and we start to get price acceptance above the open or just fail to take out the overnight low, anyone who was short late to the party starts to cover. That's what kind of kicks off these inventory corrections, right? We start to make the move higher. Again, now people in here are feeling nervous. They start to cover. We get the move higher, and we fill the gap. If that happens, we've preserved the daily higher low, and the uptrend can remain intact. Obviously, after that, we would want to see an equal high, if not a higher high, to continue the daily uptrend. So CELH is going to come down to, does it turn around immediately on a dime on the open for the move higher, or do we sort of hang out down here? If that's the case, I would be, I don't want to say skeptical, but what I would want to see at minimum is, can we do something like this? At least an equal low, not a lower low. If we take out 52 inside of CELH, not looking fantastic for the major reversal. I would just, point out something like this. Maybe this starts to take back over, and this was just some correction to that overall move, right? So it's all about your time frames, and just think of this as like, this is a fantastic analogy that I've heard, right? Think of it as a Russian nesting doll. On the weekly time frame chart, this looks like nothing more than a bear flag. Weekly time frame chart, bear flag, right? On the daily time frame chart, this starts to look like a cup and handle. We get something like that. So that's slightly more bullish. So you have to trade in agreement with whatever Russian nesting doll you are. If you're the hourly Russian nesting doll, you're probably not looking at this as a major downtrend. If you're the 5-minute Russian nesting doll, then you're probably looking for, I don't know, maybe something that on the open gives us the bull flag, and then we take it higher for the gap fill, right? So it's all about your own personal time frame. I hope that wasn't too much of a ramble there, but CELH definitely is going to have some opportunities tomorrow morning, and I do like this up channel or positive channel, upward sloping channel, whatever you want to call it here, that's forming on the short-term time horizon, all right? So enough about that one. Let's move along here. JWN is up next. Big gap up. All right. I can see it to the left of my screen before I've even zoomed in. Absolutely massive move to the upside. Retail on fire. Let's clear up this drawing set, start from scratch, just get to understand our price action that's in store here. Remove the alert. Obviously, that's been blown through. There's your shelf of support. There is your resistance. Whatever, Here's another takeaway. We talked about this on our broad market analysis. Whenever you get a period of balance, could be, again, think about different time frames. It could be 3 days long, could be 3 months long. This one happens to be one of the 3-month long periods of balance. When you get something like that, that's when you need to pay attention, because as you break out or break down from that period, there's a lot of energy, potential energy. Think about your physics class, right? Potential energy was built in here. It's got to be released in one direction or another. It just so happens that earnings was the catalyst that took us up and over the top of the, not gap, but the top of this daily range. So to me, strikes me as being fairly bullish, and maybe we get a hold on this gap up instead of just a massive fade for lower, okay? The fade still is potentially in play, but I would be careful in a situation like this with JWN. Also, remember, we're gapping up over red. It doesn't mean that everyone on today's session was building a short position, but if we look at this action here as compared to what we saw, again, I forget what ticker it was that we were looking at, but it was much different with the back and forth two-sided trade. I believe it was CRM. This one instead looks like, yes, people were building a short position here. You can see that they were clearly dominating the price action on the day, leaving us with this bear flag, indicating that we were getting price acceptance from the initiative shorts up here instead of that grindy two-sided back and forth type activity. So this definitely is going to have some people panicking, and already huge gap up, right? So let's put this back on auto, map out the overnight high, forecasted open, all that good stuff. Here we go. Overnight high, forecasted opening print. Now let's focus on the daily. So this is going to be kind of akin to what happened in Target. Target had a nice gap up today as well. I guess we'll take a look at that chart as well before we sign off. But nonetheless, if we open here, fail to take out the overnight high, trade lower, obviously that's a short to start to correct some of this inventory in here, but we're not looking for the full gap to fill, right? It's at a magnitude where we wouldn't expect a major turnaround from here all the way down to here, fill the gap at 21. Instead, what I would watch is, can we fill like maybe a third of the gap and then stop? Even worst case scenario, we come to the top of the daily balance around 24, then we turn around, right? That would strike me as a bullish implication, noting that people are probably trying to hold on to their longs that they built in this area. So anyone who is accumulating a long over the long time horizon, they're finally starting to get paid. They don't want to see it come back down into the box. Maybe they're going to start to buy more shares here around this area to try to preserve or, get back in, load some more shares at a reasonable place, right? Top of the balance. We would expect that to hold. So that's what I've got to the downside if this does turn around for inventory correction. If it moves to the upside, something interesting about this chart is if we go back to auto, notice that we have the prior earnings cycle, which left us with a massive gap down. So can we undo this here and instead make the move higher into 31? Again, I don't think that that happens over the course of one day, but it's something interesting to at least acknowledge that we're opening in no man's land. There's really nothing in terms of structure here until we get up to 31 or back down towards this area here around 24, right? So that's what I'm watching out for inside of JWN. Quickly, let's take a brief little look at TGT for target, just to indicate what I was sort of thinking about in terms of the gap up and only retracing about a third of the move. If we look at this, let's just eyeball this. Here's your high. Here's the gap fill area. There is today's low of day. So this is the overall gap. If we just sort of eyeball that, again, we filled about a third of it. So because we didn't even make it to the 50% or lower than that, I would start to give the bulls the upper hand here, noting that they're holding on to a majority of the gains made from the overnight session. Now, yes, granted, we have a red candlestick here. The sellers tried to make a stand. We tried to correct some of that inventory, but I would think of that as profit taking from anyone who is long down in here, just looking for the quick buck. If it was stronger sellers really stepping in, they would have pushed it lower, obviously to the 50% of the gap fill and or lower, right? That just simply didn't happen, which is again why I'm giving the upper hand to the buyers here. So think of this as potentially an indicator of what may happen with JWN. The broad market direction will help as well. So keep an eye on your IWM, specifically small caps, if you're looking at JWN. So that's going to wrap up our earnings roundup. I know it was a long one today, but I get fired up about this stuff, as you may have been able to tell, especially when we were talking about Wish, right? Avoid that one at all costs. There's nothing good going on there. Anyways, that's going to wrap up the video. If you enjoyed it or learned anything new, let me know in the comments section or by giving the video a thumbs up. Don't forget our main channel is linked in the description. And all of that being said, I wish you a green trading week.